And Black Shogu, I absolutely agree with you. This is why I said I feel like a lot of companies sort of hyper focus on super realistic graphics when art direction, to my mind, is far more important than graphics. Like, you can have the best graphics in the world. If the art direction doesn't fit the game, those graphics don't matter. It's far more important that you have a coherent art direction than it is to even give a crap about like how good or bad your graphics is, because good and bad graphics is also incredibly subjective. I've used this example before, but I'm happy to do it again. World of Warcraft's graphics for World of Warcraft is good graphics. It's good graphics because the art direction for World of Warcraft is solid. It knows what it wants to be, and the art direction adds to the game. This quirky sort of over-the-top kind of movement and combat effects and stuff in WoW, it works with the art direction. It wouldn't work with realistic graphics. You can't use Elder Scrolls graphics in World of Warcraft because the storytelling and the writing doesn't match that. So from my perspective, I think more games need to give up on the hyper-realism train and just start focusing on art direction instead. Jaso, so from what I understand, and this is, I might be wrong, but from the research at least, the company that we have to blame for this hyper-realism is Sony. Sony were the ones who decided to push the graphical fidelity of their games higher and higher and higher with every single game. They were insistent, and still is to this day, that if it's a Sony game, it has to look phenomenal. And they spared no expense. In something like God of War, they spent a shit ton of money making sure that that game is as good as it is. Oh man, this is way back in the day though. Black, all I can think of is that it's not so much... I do think there is a lack of creativity, but I think there's also an almost like an insistence that you want to sell games. Now, Steve Jobs talked about this. Berlana, how you doing? Steve Jobs talked about this. When Steve Jobs discussed the end of IBM and why IBM and those companies disappeared. Xerox, IBM, why these companies ultimately went the way of the dodo bird. And that was because they had controlled the market for so very long. There's not much more that you can do in terms of performance to push the performance. You're sort of at the limits of what current technology would allow from a performance perspective. And so what starts to take over is the marketing department. Because now that you have the best possible system in the world, you just need to sell that system to as many people as possible. And marketing wants to sell. So marketing will continuously come up with rebrands of shit. You saw this with Intel. Intel basically for the last 6 years have just done rebrands of their current architecture. Just continuously bringing out a new chip, which is the exact same architecture as the previous one, just slightly more optimized. Because that's marketing. Marketing needs something to sell, So you and engineering give them something to sell. And if that's a 5% uplift, then hey, we'll make it seem like it's a hell of a lot more than just 5%. iPhone does the same thing nowadays. It used to be under Steve Jobs, iPhone would actually put effort into making at least decent consumer items. That's long gone. Most of the iPhones that come out today is exactly the same iPhone as the previous one. So yeah, fundamentally, marketing, and by the way, you see it now with NVIDIA. The reason we have all of these phenomenally useless graphics cards from NVIDIA, like the 5060 8 gig and the 5060 16 gig, but neither of them is actually a 5060. And the 5070, but the 5070 is actually useless. You need to go for the 5070 Ti. The fact that you have all of these different ones is as a result of marketing departments. The marketing department needs a way to sell as many copies as possible. And by having multiple layers, you can trick as many people into buying the shit that you need. Now, think about it from a games perspective. Think about you're in the marketing department working for EA. Can you market a story? Not really. Marketing a story would be near impossible, right? Because marketing a story would require a half an hour long cinematic to sort of introduce people to the story. So marketing a story is very hard. It's not completely impossible, but it is very difficult because stories tend to take time and you have to sort of lead people into the story. But what you can market is graphics. Graphics is easy. You see the cinematic. The cinematic is beautiful. The graphics are insane. People get excited. So that's why there's that incessant focus on graphics. It is the easiest way to get as many people as possible interested in your product. Because everything else is not really marketable. Can you market gameplay? Not until the game comes out. It's only once the game comes out and people start telling their friends how good the gameplay is, that the gameplay will be a market in and of itself. Until then, you have a couple of things that you can do in order to market a game. The first is brilliant art direction. So, for example, Phasia, how you doing? For example, Elden Ring. Elden Ring's graphics is very good, right? But it's not hyper-realistic. Although what marketed that game was twofold. George R.R. Martin was a big marketing factor for that game. And then the art direction. And then, of course, the fact that it's a Souls game. And they already have a name for themselves of being a Souls game. But even if you remove the Souls game, even I, as not really a Souls player, still enjoyed the cinematics of Elden Ring. And I still wanted to play Elden Ring because George R. R. Martin was involved in it and the graphics, the art direction was pretty decent. But story, how do you market it? How do you market it? Everything else requires more interaction than a simple look. Aphasia, literally that. So, thank you. You very succinctly summed up what I was trying to explain in about 10 minutes, so I appreciate that. But yes, you're absolutely correct. For every other aspect of a video game, you're going to need hours in order to convince someone, or a book. And so some games do books. So you make a game based on a book, the book markets the story, and now you can sell the game based off of that book. So you could do that too. And there's a couple of companies that have tried Lord of the Rings games with that sort of mindset.